You're watching News at Prime. To this now, the Centre for Development Enterprise sat down with experts, business leaders, former public servants, including academics, to explore burning issues facing South Africa. The Government of National Unity's ability to reverse 15 years of economic stagnation and decline are among the issues discussed. In our new segment called Leadership Thursday, we sat down with the CDE's Executive Director, Anne Bernstein, to find out if anything has changed for the better since the formation of the GNU. We began by asking if the best people were appointed to the key jobs.
Look, it's a very difficult thing to say in any society that the state is weak and that it's corrupt and that it's really failing to deliver. So we don't say that lightly, but I think that is the truth about South Africa's state. There are pockets of excellence, and I know some excellent civil servants and senior people who work very hard on behalf of the country. But in general, South Africa, we know that state capture and cadre deployment have led to very many people in senior positions in the state who really have been appointed because of who they know and what they might do rather than their competence to do the job. So the GNU, yes, we have some new members of cabinet on all sides, I think, on the ANC, and then the DA has come in. But in general, if you look at the whole of government, SOEs, boards, executives, and senior people running many departments, they're not the best people in South Africa, especially for a country in such deep trouble.
Hard choices must be made about people, policies, and how to get things done because time is running out. Question is the GNU living up to that promise, you think?
Well, a lot of people tell me I mustn't be impatient and that change takes time, and they're right. The GNU is a phenomenal opportunity for South Africa if we can get it to deliver. Now, it's not going to deliver if it applies the sixth administration's policies for the next 5 years. So things have to change. Why? Because South Africa is in a terrible state. We have had about 1% per annum growth, economic growth for the last 15 years, and that doesn't seem to be changing much if you look at what the Minister of Finance is predicting. 1.2 or 3 this year, hopefully 1.8 next year. This is far too little. We have one of the world's, maybe the worst unemployment rate imaginable. And yes, I know the figures came out yesterday and it's looking a little bit better, but this changes every quarter. We're not making a dent in the over 12 million people who are unemployed. So I can go through lots of other. Manufacturing has fallen faster than almost any other developing country. Investments down. We can go through all our horrors. The fact of the matter is we can't keep doing what we've been doing for the last 5-10 years. So changes have to be made, and they're not just tweaking at the edges. They're fundamental.
Is speed one of the key elements of what you proposed at the time? Are things done with the necessary pace, you think?
I don't think the president, who is trying to reform certain things, I don't think he is taking it fast enough, putting enough pressure on people, firing people who don't deliver. I don't think there is sufficient urgency in government, even now. I think that it's hard to change. Everybody wants growth, but nobody wants to change. And that's human nature. So you've got to come in with real determination to start turning things in a new direction. And you've got to put pressure on your executives to do that. Take the NPA, which we're going to talk about. We've had the Zondo Commission report, we've had earlier reports into Eskom and Transnet, but the number of successful major prosecutions is minuscule. It's not good enough. Now, the president has a role to play in this. So I think there isn't sufficient urgency, and I think too few people appreciate how very serious our challenges are. And the longer they take, you and I have been having the same conversations for a long time now, the longer you leave these challenges, they're not static. They get worse. They get deeper rooted, and it gets harder and harder to change things.
Talking about things needing to be done with speed, are there milestones that we can point to 5 months into the GNU? Are there specific things that you can say, these are targets that we are confident are going to be met?
You've been reading my mind. I think one of the biggest challenges about the GNU and the window it gives us of opportunity is to say, what are the steps along the way? So one could say in 3 years or 5 years, you have to have faster growth. You have to have made a significant dent in unemployment. That's millions of people. But how do we get there? And I think this is a very big challenge. And I would be lying if I said that I know what those stepping stones are. Now, there's some people who say they're little green shoots and we must go for the easy things first and we build momentum and then we can do the bigger things. I have a different view. Obviously, if there's small things you can do quickly that will make a difference to people's lives, that's important. But a country in the trouble that we're in, I think you have to pick some very hard issues where you're going to make a hard turn. And it might be you can't do it tomorrow, but you say, that's where I'm going. And I will have some targets and deadlines to get there. And we don't have that yet. The GNU has yet to agree a common program of action. And we can all agree on motherhood and apple pie, and some of us believe in the Constitution, which is why the GNU and its commitment to the constitutionalism is so important, and the rule of law. But on the economic front, on the labor front, on every other front we can think of, transport and logistics, we're not seeing clear deadlines. We're not seeing, this is my first step and I'll do it in 6 months. We're not seeing that yet, and it's hard, but we have to get there.
Part of the reason why I started this conversation off this way is because I'd like for us to reflect on the last few weeks, which, at least in my view, have been nothing but mayhem in South Africa. And here's why I'm saying that. We've seen mass killings in more than one province. Children have died and/or hospitalized because of alleged food poisoning. Illegal mining activities are back in the media spotlight. Water cuts or restrictions have almost become a permanent feature of our lives. How do you tell citizens of this country to keep a positive attitude about their country?
That's a very difficult question. So let's start with a few things. We know there have been all sorts of troubles in many towns and cities across the country, but now Johannesburg is crumbling. Johannesburg, which is our window to the world, it is in many ways the commercial financial heart of our country. And the many millions of people who live here, this is really important now. And I think what's happening is one day the chickens come home to roost. And we've let too many things lie. And people complain, but we don't get around to it, or it's not a priority, or going on another overseas trip is more important for our governing class than actually dealing with what's going on. The water situation is, I mean, it's outrageous that it's been allowed to get to this situation. And it's a combination of many things. We need to look at maintenance, which we've all been talking about for a long time, as well as proper investment in infrastructure rather than looting. So we've, you know, if you look at the mining situation, we've known about the zama-zamas and the things that are going on in different parts of the country at scale for a long time. We have to wait for a crisis or for some decision by the police to kind of get people out of underground. The way it's been done is, and the comments that are being made are, to my mind, contrary to everything that Nelson Mandela and the last 30 years of democracy have tried to establish in this country.
Allow me to interrupt you, especially when you say the comments that are being made specifically around the mining issue. They stand in direct opposition to what Madiba would have said if he were alive. Talk to me about what is problematic for you about what the minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, has had to say about the mining situation that's unfolding, the illegal mining. I think we have to be specific about that, the illegal mining situation that is unfolding in Stilfontein.
Look, we've allowed our migration policy, we'll sort of fix it, but we don't. We've allowed mining to decline disastrously and this situation to fester for year upon year upon year. So you can talk about the failings of migration policy, you can talk about the failings of policing. I believe in the rule of law, which means that in a democracy, we should all obey the law. So I'm not in favor of illegal migration into South Africa, but we need to be realistic about that situation. But we haven't dealt with it. Now we have a situation which is a crisis, and people's lives are at stake. And frankly, I think the human rights culture of our constitution and the transition to democracy requires that we treat people as people. I'm being lectured about Ubuntu on many occasions by my friends, and that's one of our, it should be an important feature of public life in South Africa, and some of the comments that are being made run directly counter to that. So yes, you need to deal with the zama-zama situation, and you need to deal with it systemically, not just, you know, not just one situation and we're going to get people out of underground. What is our strategy to deal with this? Has the ministers involved sat with the mining industry and said, you know much more than we do about this. What is your approach? What do you think we should do? We need a joint strategy. We don't need to manufacture crises like this.
All of what we've spoken about now touches on what many observers have said is the socio-economic issues in our country that are breeding all the ills that we are seeing. And these things are predicated upon our economy functioning so that it starts delivering on the jobs that people so want. I'd like us to take a break for a moment because when we return, I'd like for us to touch on the state-owned companies, which is another element that you touched on. So we'll pick up this conversation in a moment. You're still watching the conversation between Anne Bernstein and myself. She is the Executive Director at the Center for Development Enterprise. And I'd like for us to touch on a different topic for a moment, and that's the functionality and sustainability of state-owned companies. If the economy is to function, SOCs like Transnet, and I want to go back to some of what you wrote last year, the manner in which they ought to be turned around isn't just a matter of institutional level tweak. These are the words you used. This requires a radical rethink. Are we moving towards that direction?
Well, anyone who read the paper this week, front page headlines in Business Day 2 days in a row, will see that we're not making real progress when it comes to Transnet. The private company that we're trying to do a deal with, and it's been delayed through the courts and whatever, is saying Transnet is not committed to really bringing the private sector in. So that's 18 months on, very worrying indeed. I think what we're seeing is the failure of what the ANC have been talking about for a very long time, the failure of the developmental state. And even as the state collapses around us, SOEs, other parts of the state, water, electricity, you name it, this belief in something called the developmental state, which is never clearly defined, continues. So this is a complex situation. The SOEs involve an enormous part of our economy, and they're not delivering. The main SOEs are not delivering. And I think Transnet is probably the worst example at the moment. And it has enormous impact, hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions of rand for our economy. And we can't get our economy to start growing unless we fix the ports, which are the worst in the world, according to the World Bank, the railways, and metro rail. So this is an enormous challenge, and it's not as simple as just privatize everything. That would be far too simple, but it's quite clear that you have to look again at the policies of Transnet. Are they really committed to a new deal? Are they really committed? Are these the right people at every level, from the board to the executive? And what is the problem here? So we have, we're seeing other countries much poorer than us putting money into their ports and stealing our business. This can't go on like this. But we're not making nearly sufficient progress. And for the first time after the election, I thought that the statement by business and government on Transnet for the first time said, gee, not much progress, not fast enough, we're not getting there. Now we're having all these comments by the private sector company that was going to do the concession. I think it's a very worrying week, and it's a very serious situation.
What is the problem at Transnet? Is it a leadership issue? Because not so long ago, we saw a wholesale leadership change.
Yes, we appointed a new board, which didn't have fiscal and auditing experience. So then they had to bring on some new people. Makes you wonder about the people deciding about the new board in the first place. So I don't know. I'm not competent to assess. I don't know about the current executives at different levels of Transnet, which is a massive set of companies, but they're not doing very well. And this is not all that hard. So other countries are doing much better. We've had a lot of time. I'm not persuaded of urgency. Or do we have the right leaders? We recommended earlier this year that we take an approach which says in mission-critical jobs in South Africa's state, we need to find a mechanism. We put up a suggestion of 120 positions, including SOEs, where we said in a fair way, people should reapply for their jobs. And it should include boards and CEOs and however low you go in terms of leadership. This hasn't happened, and so far, I'm not persuaded.
So I wonder whether we can draw lessons from Eskom and try and apply that to Transnet. And I'm shifting now to Eskom. Do you think we have genuinely seen the back of load shedding? And what is it that's been done right at Eskom?
Well, I'm not 100% sure. So we don't have load shedding, but the economy's dead. So yes, power plants are delivering more power. I don't quite know exactly what happened. In fact, I'm interviewing the chairman of Eskom next Tuesday evening, and I'm going to be asking him a whole lot of these questions. Explain to me as a citizen. So it's fantastic we don't have load shedding at the moment. What happens when the economy goes to 3%, which we certainly have to aim for? What happens then? What happens in terms of the financing of Eskom? So we've sorted out one problem, very important, big help to the economy that we don't have load shedding at the moment. Except if you live in Johannesburg, you have load sharing or load reduction, and then you don't have power for hour upon hour upon hour regularly. So I think Eskom, you know, some people say this is a state utility in a death spiral. The finances are now the big issue you've got to think about. Citizens can't afford the rates, the increases that Eskom is asking from NERSA. Is the regulator competent to do its job as things get, you know, as we bring in more competition? There are a whole lot of issues we haven't yet dealt with. So we've dealt with one, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And I think most companies, if they're not yet on solar. So Eskom's losing lots of its customers. Will they be able to deal with the growth that we're trying to achieve? What's the game plan? I'm a reasonably informed citizen. I couldn't explain to you exactly what you were asking me earlier. Where do we want to go, and what are the milestones we have to reach? I can't answer that.
I'd like to then wind down the conversation with a topic that talks to the strengthening of state institutions, and one of those that you wrote quite an authoritative piece on was the National Prosecuting Authority. And I want to make reference directly to some of what you said. This was in October when you wrote, and I quote, "The NPA has been disappointing in its performance, and this has encouraged impunity among criminals. It has failed to deter the spread of corruption, and it has led to a pervasive sense of despair that the state cannot or will not enforce the law." In your view, why do you think the NPA has struggled to deliver on the major prosecutions that the country so desperately needs to see?
We're not sure. And it's more than 5 years since we've had new leadership at the NPA. And there are a number of suppositions. Does it have enough support from the executive? Are they getting rid of... Everyone said 2021 or earlier that the NPA had been hollowed out by state capture, and that must be very difficult to run an organization and get rid of the, let's call them, the people who are not committed to the Constitution, and to dealing with the top criminals. Now, the NPA is a very big and very vital institution. They do a lot of work with ordinary criminal activity. Our document was focused on major corruption crimes, financial and state corruption. That's what we were looking at. So we came up, let me tell you a startling fact. In August 2023, the head of the NPA asked the president, this is how you have to do it in law, to suspend a senior director of the NPA. We are now talking to each other on the 14th of November 2024. 15, 16 months later, they have yet to hear from the president. That's one thing. The other, which people have talked about, but now everyone's forgotten, the NPA does not have access to the Zondo Commission archives, which are held by the Minister of the Justice Department, and they have got all sorts of rules and obstacles so that the NPA, which I think should just get the whole Zondo archive, do not have full and easy access here. Why? What is going on with the executive in terms of empowering the NPA to do its job? So those are very important questions. At the same time, we're saying we think a retired judge should be asked to do a review of the NPA to answer the question that I think many, many citizens are asking. What is taking so long to deal with the key culprits of state capture, of looting of the state? We've had an elite looting the state. Why can't we deal with these people, and why do we not have a successful major prosecution yet?
Well, they will argue that they have taken cases to court. They have arrested some of these prominent people. But I guess the question is, arresting someone and taking them to court is one thing, but if the case falls apart, it's a completely different story. Why do you think that is?
Look, I think there's an issue of competence and capacity within the NPA. We also have, they're dependent on the investigative skills of the Hawks. You will remember we closed down the Scorpions. The Hawks are not independent. They report to the SAPs. They don't report to the NPA. We've only just set up this independent directorate to do investigations, IDAC. So there are capacity questions, but this is quite a long time. So the truth of the matter is, if you talk to, as we did, leading judges, senior prosecutors...
Well, their gripe is that you're not talking to them, the NPA, to find out exactly what is it that they are doing, because they actually were quite critical of you.
We wrote to the Minister of Justice. We thought the NPA reports to the Minister of Justice. We will talk to the Minister of Justice. She will guide us on what to do. 2.5 months later, we haven't had a reply from the Minister of Justice. And we did try to get hold of key people in the NPA, but it only the sort of my co-author, very highly respected person in the legal field, Professor Helton Cheadle, did speak to one of the deputy directors of the NPA, but it was delayed. So we did make an effort, and we certainly are not saying that the NPA are not doing any work. We're saying when it comes to the difficult issues, the big corruption cases, we're not getting successful prosecutions, and we're not making it, we're saying why? There are lots of allegations. Let's get a judge, retired judge, like we did on SARS, where Judge Nugent very quickly got to the bottom of what was wrong with SARS. We got a whole new leadership at SARS, Edward Kisvetter and others, and they're doing a good job now. Yeah. We're saying, let's look at the facts about the NPA, let an independent retired judge do it thoroughly, no holds barred, and then you and I in 6 months' time or 8 months' time could say, well, this is what the judge said. Now let's act.
Let's end it on this. The NPA head, Shamila Batoy, the understanding is that she may reach her retirement age sometime next year, late 2025. What do you think her legacy?
Well, in the area that we've looked at, I think it's been mixed. I think there's a lot of concern, not fast enough and not successful enough. And I don't want to make a judgment on her legacy. That's why we want a retired judge to review the NPA. I think it's too easy for outsiders to hold forth, even if they think they know all sorts of things. There are lots of allegations. But the fact is that here we are, 6, 7 years into President Ramaphosa's rule of South Africa, and name me a senior person who stole money from the state who's in jail.
Not a single. And Bernstein, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you sitting down with us.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks indeed. Executive Director at the Center for Development Enterprise. This has been our Leadership Thursday interview.